Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture. Today's episode, Carton. Hi everybody, just before we get started properly, wanted to let you know that it's just me today. Our scheduling difficulties have reared their ugly heads, and transatlantic recording has become a non-option for the last couple of weeks. And so you're stuck with just the Canadian of the Canadian Scot word nerd combo that you've come to hopefully know and love, at least tolerate. On that note, I'd like to do a little audience survey. So if you could get in touch with us over Facebook or Twitter or email or Instagram or however you like, and let us know if when these situations show up and we just can't get a recording session put together in time, would you rather have an episode and it's just one of us to keep up with consistency and the like? Or would it be worth it to you to sort of, are you kind of going, well, why don't you just wait and then do it together later on? So yeah, if you could get in touch and let us know which one of those two options you'd rather do when we get to these impasses, that'd be great. I like to try to keep it as consistent as possible with the episodes, and so that's why I want one of us to do a solo shot if we can't do one together, but maybe you guys are sitting here going, this just isn't really worth it. So let us know, and then we can do the thing that you would prefer we do. Or if there's an impasse, we'll just keep making up our minds as we go along. So, all that business taken care of, let's dive in. So the word that I've chosen today is cartoon. And it's like most of the words that we choose for these episodes, it just kind of showed up one day. I was reading something and it sort of jumped out at me. It's one of those cartoony, lights from above type of moment. You hear the angelic choir going, ah, and then you kind of go, wait, that's a weird looking word. Why does that mean that? So I looked it up, and it's a lot older than I thought it was going to be. It first showed up in the OED, so remember that's print examples, not oral use, obviously, so it's probably being used before then, but there's an interesting point on that in a little bit. It first showed up in use in the OED in 1684. And what it first meant was a drawing on stout paper made as a design for a painting of the same size to be executed in fresco or oil, or for a work in tapestry, mosaic, stained glass, or the like. And that definition is from the OED. So this is an age check for a lot of people, I would imagine, but when people used to do like murals in school, we'd use these things called overhead projectors. For you kids, it's basically just a really analog projection system, but it would shine, project a picture onto a wall, and then they would be traced that way and then made. So that projection is sort of like the idea here. They would do a full-blown, full-scale example of whatever work of art they were working on or intending to make, and that would be the kind of template. And so that was called a cartoon, and that was in the late 17th century. That's what cartoon meant. The next definition the OED has for it gets a little closer to the way we know the word today, and it shows up in 1843, and it originally was for a full-page satirical illustration in a comic current affairs publication, and so think like a print version of The Daily Show or The Colbert Report or The MASH Report or not the MASH Report, the one with Nish Kumar in Britain. Amy would know. Anyway, think a print version of one of those, not quite Mad Magazine, but almost, maybe. And so a full page kind of political cartoon would have been the next use of that. And then it went from there into the kind of comic strips that we know. So a funny illustration, funny topical drawing, whatever size, whatever format, in a newspaper or a periodical of some sort. So then it became that. It first meant an animated cartoon in 1916, which is also slightly earlier. I mean, it probably shouldn't strike me as really early, because movies, like actual movies, were not long after that, but that's when it started to mean an animated cartoon. And so you see the progression there from large utilitarian artistic template to large illustrative satirical work to just a work in a paper, and then you get the cartoon characters going over to animation in the early 20th century. The etymology of this is sort of simple. The OON was a spelling convention in English in sort of the 15th through 17th century for French loanwords where the accent was on the last syllable of a word that had an ON ending in French. And so this comes from the French word carton, C-A-R-T-O-N, which earlier came from Latin cartone, and earlier than that from medieval Latin carta, meaning just paper or card. And so the carton ending, the carton word with the ON ending, in order to kind of, I don't really know why. It was just one of these spelling conventions that sort of shows up, but it became an OON ending when it was written in English. And so other OON endings, like other similar endings for French loanwords, there's a bunch of them, and they're all fun to say, so I'm going to say them. So there's balloon, buffoon, bassoon, harpoon, lampoon, lagoon, and macaroon. Wasn't that fun? It was fun for me. I hope it was all right for you. So the OON. There's not a lot of examples of actual English words with the OON ending. The only two that I could find, well, the one that I could find was spittoon. And then there was a series of other ones which were a lot less fortunate, but a lot sort of, alas, not hugely surprising. There was a racial classification system. There probably still is, but in some sectors. And something that always surprises me is how scientific and technical people got with their racism, which is an odd thing, because I kind of, you sort of want to think of racism terrible, but at least it's sort of knee-jerk or kind of reactionary, hot-headed. The cold-blooded racism is something else entirely, and that's what this shows up. And so you get words like quadroon and octoroon, which are classification systems for how the level of quote-unquote mixed blood someone had. So if someone was 1/4 black, whatever that meant at the time and in that situation, they were a quadroon. An octoroon was 1/8, etc., etc. Anyway, gross stuff. Much less fun than balloon, buffoon, bassoon, harpoon, lampoon, lagoon, and macaroon. But those are the only examples of the OON ending that I could find in actual English words. Other than that, they are all French loan words and just this weird little spelling quirk that stuck with us. And so the other weird thing that I noticed, that I found, was that despite the fact that the word cartoon comes from the French carton, and that showed up in the late 1600s, the English word carton, from exactly the same French word, because it was originally because it was done on this sort of stout paper. That stout paper, that's the connecting bit. So the heavy paper that it was drawn on to give it the full-scale durability or whatever to the drawing, that's the connection there. But the English word carton doesn't show up until like 200 years later, 150 years later. What does I have it written down here somewhere? 1816, there it is. 130 years after cartoon shows up, we get the English word carton, where they didn't do that OON ending, because it was a little bit late for that to be a thing, I guess. And they switched the emphasis around, so rather than carton, it's carton. And it means the same thing. But it took 130 years for the French word to migrate over again, but without being changed for the English audience. So that's just another little interesting tidbit that I found on here. So we get cartoon and carton, The reason that they look the same, even though if you never actually thought of it, because I hadn't thought of it, is because they are essentially the same, just took very different paths. And then as cartoon got further and further from referring to the paper, English just went, we'll just take that word again, thank you very much, French, and we'll do it again. So for carton. So that is the story of cartoon, very briefly. Again, apologies that you're stuck with a lone word nerd voice in the wilderness here, but hopefully the consistency of the show episodes, not anyway, I do words. Having consistently released episodes, again, if that's more important to you than having both of us all the time, shout out with that answer. And if you'd be like, no offense, or offense, whatever, I can take it. If you'd prefer we just sort of waited and irregular episodes are okay to have the both of us in on them, then let us know that too. Other than that, our next scheduled episode should, fingers crossed, everybody, consist of both Amy and I. And we will talk to you again later. Bye. And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard in this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.